what is that sense of adventure that you want to tap into? What is that thing that you've done in the past that has brought up so many emotions and sense of meaning and fulfillment and excitement and like you're really living? Maybe it's something that you've been thinking about doing again, or that trip you've been looking to take, or the adventure, or the project, or the challenge that you've been looking to endure. Well, ladies and gentlemen, we have a special guest on the show today. We have Chris Clifton, who was my roommate in Peru a decade ago from our study abroad trip to Cusco, Peru. And this was one of the most special episodes that we've ever done on the show. In this episode, we dive into his trip, his adventure, his conquering of Mount Kilimanjaro in Africa, the world's largest freestanding mountain in the world, 19,341 feet of elevation that he just climbed about 3 months ago. And we dive into his why. We dive into how he started thinking about this, how he overcame the struggles and the challenges and the adversities that he faced getting to the top of this thing. We dove into what he would recommend for you as an individual considering something that is a bucket list item, if you will, or an adventure or a challenge that you're contemplating for your life, and how to overcome and navigate those things mentally, physically, emotionally, spiritually. And so without further ado, we're going to go ahead and jump into this thing. I bring to you Christopher Clifton. Here we go. Here we go. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another episode of the Seeds of Success podcast. It's your host, Colin Walters, and I'm so freaking pumped for today's episode. We have, I don't even know what to call you. Obviously, my friend, longtime friend, my
A decade.
Cuscanian roommate. Gosh, man, it's been over a decade since ladies and gentlemen, we have Chris Clifton on the podcast today, and Chris and I met just about a decade ago, where I showed up to Peru for day one of traveling to study abroad in Cusco, and Chris Clifton and I were freaking roommates for the 4 months that we lived there. And so this goes back. This goes back a decade, and we just chatted for like 45 minutes, catching up a little bit before even jumping onto the podcast here. And we have Chris on to talk about his trip and his recent expedition, summiting Mount Kilimanjaro in Africa. That's the purpose of today. So if you like adventure, if you like travel, if you like overcoming limits, self-limiting beliefs, finding things within you from a mental, physical, spiritual realm. This is the episode for you. And without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to go ahead and hand the microphone over to Chris. It's so freaking good to have you on the show, man. Thanks for coming on.
Colin, I cannot thank you enough for the generous introduction and for the formative role that you've played in my life. As you mentioned, yeah, we met almost 10 years ago during an event that I think we could both say forever altered the course of our lives and
Forever.
made us into completely different people. There was the life we could have lived, and there's the life we did thanks to going to Peru and hanging out with you every day and
Mm,
sharing so many experiences, like going to Machu Picchu and floating around Lake Titicaca and all the exploring that we did. I
mhm.
can't thank you enough for the role you played in that, because I would not have gotten to the top of Kilimanjaro had I not gone to Peru back in 2014 when I was 19. And so, yeah, and I'm so glad that we keep in touch even all these years later.
Mhm.
You're just a wonderful person, and you inspire me still now. But yes, my going to Peru 10 years ago began the long and indirect journey that led me to my life's work and something that gives me a deep sense of fulfillment,
Mm.
which is teaching high school students in rural Wyoming. I did a place called Black Butte High School. We have 100 students. I know each and every one of them, even if I don't have them in class, talk to them every day. I know some very interesting things about their lives and experiences. And yeah, I teach them Spanish 1, Spanish 2,
Mhm.
world cultures. I
So awesome.
am going to teach cultural anthropology. It's a lot of fun.
Mhm.
I'm going to teach cultural anthropology and current events this coming school year, some courses that I am developing myself. And my hobbies outside of school are working on a master's degree, which I'm almost finished with, and is kind of why I went to Tanzania, was to celebrate that, because it was pretty difficult. And some of the other proudest things I've done working with students are taking 2 trips with 23 students to Costa Rica last summer. We went to an elementary school and played soccer with Costa Rica students. We went to a dance recital that became a dance when the kids lost interest in watching and wanted to put on the flowing skirts and participate. And just watching them grow, it was really fun watching them grow
Amazing.
so much as people. And
Mhm.
just a couple weeks ago, actually, my girlfriend and I were at a pottery painting seminar, and this lady came up to me who I did not know, and she's like, "Are you Mr. Clifton?" And I said, "Oh, yes, I am. Why? What have I done?" And she said, "Oh, no, no. My daughter went on the trip with you over the summer, and she came back a completely different person. And I
It's
think that
amazing.
it changed her life even in high school." And so
Mhm.
that's what gives me a deep sense of fulfillment. And I'm really proud of the fact that I have about 15 students signed up to go back to Peru actually next summer to
Mhm.
see Cusco, where we lived, and all the sites that we saw. And that's part of how I sell the trip to people, is that I've lived in Peru. I've been to all the places. It's cool. It's a cool mix of landscapes and culture and human history. And really looking forward to that, especially because I get to share it with my wonderful girlfriend. She will be coming along as well, and hopefully my
Oh my
parents.
gosh, that's amazing.
I'm really looking forward to it. But yeah, thanks to going to Peru, I started on this journey in my life that I now have a lifestyle beyond my wildest dreams,
Mm,
including climbing Kilimanjaro. And I'm very blessed, is all I can really say.
mm. Well, thanks for the background. It's really cool. Like, I'm hearing all this as relatively net new information. I know we just talked about some of it, but all these details that you're filling in, I'm just like awestruck because for those listening, it's trips like what we did going to study abroad in Peru, or the trip that you've, thought about taking all your life, that you end up finally doing after, thinking about it for so long, that really do quite literally change the entire trajectory of your life. And in one way or another, your life is forever changed, and usually for the better. I know that, Chris and I can stand here and say that confidently. At least, I that's my take from you, Chris, is that we can both confidently say that trip changed our lives for the better, and it was, the best decision that we could have made. And I was just had a retreat, men's retreat a couple weeks ago, and we had to write down our top 5 most proud accomplishments in life, and that was in my
Mhm.
top 5, was going to study abroad and live in Cusco, Peru for 4 months. It was like, and it's one of those experiences you that can never be taken away from you, right? That you
Yes.
have forever. And now the fact that you're able to give back in that same manner, because for those listening, when I first met Chris, he basically told me that he was going to run for office, and I've never actually been entertained watching somebody read until I watched how fast Chris would flip his pages in our room. And I remember I asked you, I'm like, I'm sorry, did you just read that page? And you said yes. I said, okay. Um, tell me what you just read. And you like basically just ripped the entire concept of what you read, and you gave it to me in a very articulated manner. And I'm like, that was so impressive. And so um the point of me bringing that up is that trip definitely changed your life. And now you're at a place of just deep rooted fulfillment, living a dream, right? Which I hope can inspire others to do the same, that are listening in to this episode and hearing your story. So, yeah, Chris, let's dive into your trip in Kilimanjaro. So give us the quick background, like when did it just happen? And then take it back for us, like where did the idea come from and how did you start thinking about doing this and like start planting those seeds?
It's hard to say one particular date. I think I learned about Kilimanjaro sometime in the last like 4 or 5 years. It's part of pop culture. It's in songs. I could still picture the uh, plains of Africa. God bless the rains. So I think about that when I think about Kilimanjaro. And when I did the research and discovered that it was difficult but not deadly like
Mhm.
other higher mountains, um, it became even more interesting. And
Mm.
then when I found a tour company that offered it and had a website and reviews and was well rated by people, I decided to go for it. But the real inspiration was that I wanted to push myself out of my comfort zone because by now I've lived in 3 different Spanish speaking countries, Peru, as you mentioned, also Argentina, and
Mhm.
then I lived in Costa Rica about 2 years ago. So I felt very comfortable in a Spanish speaking setting where I could talk to anyone and go anywhere and do anything. But I realized that your comfort zone is also a bit of a rut. So when I discovered that Swahili was spoken in Tanzania, where I would be going, and that I did not speak any
Wow.
Swahili, and that the landscape was completely different, and that it was a whole different continent and culture. I said, I think I'm ready to push myself like this, and to celebrate that I'd almost finished a college degree, which was much less painful and difficult than the first time. So I reserved it, I want to say about a year and a half ago, once I had things kind of scheduled out with my life and I knew what my work schedule was. Um, and then I just wanted to do it to prove to myself that I could do the most difficult thing I'd ever thought of in my entire life up
Mm.
until this point, which was climbing a 19,000-foot mountain to um, to put to rest some questions to say, how far can I go mentally and physically, um, and what is Tanzania like? And all of those questions were far exceeded
Mhm.
beyond any of my wildest expectations.
It sounds like it was a combination of things, right? Like being able to identify where you are at in life, right? Which I think is big. And I liked what you said earlier. I didn't know that essentially this was almost like a reward, right, for the hard work that you've done for working through your schooling, right? And this was something that kind of, time wise made sense. The work that you just done, but also like these I guess like limiting beliefs that it sounds like you might have had on yourself and like stretching your comfort zones. Like I why Kilimanjaro? And I asked that you just mentioned it was difficult but not deadly, which I think is super important. The culture and trying something just totally different. Something that you didn't know, the language, right? The landscape. Um, did you like where did you hear that it was difficult but not deadly? And like how did it all start coming to fruition?
Oh man, I did it kind of in the reverse order. I decided to do it and locked myself in, and only then did I start doing the
Once you had heard
research and
about
learning.
um uh, the crew, the organization that actually the guides.
Yes,
Okay. So,
uh,
okay.
it was kind of like a fire, aim, and then get ready, where
Mhm.
I committed to doing it. I
Beautiful.
wrote it on the Google Doc that manages all my schedule and activities, and then I started watching some YouTube videos, which I love to
Yep.
see things, and I read a few reports from other people. Um, I met someone that I work with knows someone who's done it somewhere else in Wyoming, so I got like a secondhand account of their experience. But mostly, I focused on training, getting myself ready physically and mentally. Um, I was really ready physically, but so mentally and emotionally
Mhm.
and spiritually. But it was hard to balance all of the numerous responsibilities in addition to working full time. And I teach extra classes for our school district's virtual school, which takes another. 7 to 8 hours a week, and then I was taking a college class, so it was a very delicate juggling act, and there was a lot of luck involved. I went to the gym as much as I could. I'm not going to say that I trained 6 days a week and had my heart rate tracked down to the minute. Uh,
Mhm.
there was a lot of fingers crossed and hoping and praying, but um, with a good list of gear and the support from the outfitter, I feel like I had everything I needed when I departed for the crucible of flying to Africa um, in the middle of December.
You mentioned that you were mentally and spiritually. Did you actually do things to prepare yourself for for this?
Other than the physical training, I really did not, unfortunately. And looking back, I wish I had. Um, and I always have a difficult time going. I love to do these epic adventures, but the actual like getting on the plane and leaving is frequently very difficult. It invokes a lot of emotions. As I
Yeah.
get older, I have a more established life. I have a long-term girlfriend. We just got a cat. We've been living in the same place for a couple of years, and so
Uh-huh.
it's difficult to like
Yeah.
leave behind my established life. And there were
Yeah.
a lot of emotions, a little bit of guilt, a little bit of um, am I making a mistake? Is this what I should be doing at this phase in my life? But thanks to her loving support, all those doubts dissipated pretty quickly once I actually started the
Good.
process of getting to Tanzania, and then 24 hours later, when I arrived and was on the ground, I felt really good. It felt nice to be in the warm tropical sunshine as opposed to the frozen Wyoming winter. Um, but yeah, I was spiritually prepared for the journey of getting there, but the climbing the mountain took more of a physical toll that became a mental toll than I
Mhm.
anticipated, and that was probably the biggest challenge I faced, was just willing myself to keep going, even though I felt really sick for the last probably 20% of the trip.
Mm.
And that was, looking back, one of the most satisfying things about it, but definitely one of the most difficult in the moment.
I want to come back to that, the part about you getting sick and questioning how to continue going. I also want to touch on a couple things that I think are interesting, and from the whole mental hurdle about like, you know, getting starting to mentally prepare yourself. I think just doing the things starts getting you there, right? So working with the end in mind, right? You said, and I freaking love it. You said fire ready aim, right? So you committed, which I think is step one of taking an actual action in order to start setting yourself up for N how do I wanna say that? Starting to mentally prepare yourself that this is a very real thing, and that you are slowly then, for every action that you take, is like casting a vote for the type of individual that you need to become, right? For when you're actually out there on the mountain, then every day that, whether it was the perfect physical training plan or not, like the fact of showing up however many days a week or however many different times with all the other things, like the fact that you prioritized it with everything else that you had going on. I think all those little things, to me at least, add up to continuing to build your mental resilience. And like, I think overall commitment is the word that comes to my mind. Like, you're, committed to getting it done and getting to the top of this thing. And then when that plane takes off, man, I can't even imagine like so many emotions going through your head. So you get on the plane, and I don't know anything about traveling over to Africa. Like, what's the plane ride, and how many hours? Where'd you land? What happened when you got there?
I flew out of Rock Springs. We have a small airport, but it took four
Okay.
different flights each way, so 8 flights in total. And then it
Okay.
was just about 24 hours there and back. I was fortunate to have pretty quick layovers, but
Hmm.
I had to fly from Rock Springs to Denver, and then Denver to New York, New York to Amsterdam, and then Amsterdam. After all this flying, I boarded a 9 hour flight to Tanzania, to the Kilimanjaro International Airport, which is
Wow.
pretty close, pretty close to the mountain. And so I had a lot of time to
Can you
think and
see it
reflect.
when you're pulling in on the plane? Like, were you able to see? I
We
don't know anything.
I arrived in the dark, unfortunately, but it was kind of
Mm,
satisfying because I got in at like 9 o'clock at night, and it was dark. But then we got picked up, and then we went to the hotel, and the hotel is famous for the views of Kilimanjaro that it offers.
mm,
So the next morning, I made it a point to like not look out the window, and I went up to
yeah.
the rooftop viewing area, and it was this perfectly clear day,
Oh
and
my
you could
god.
see the whole
Oh my god.
massive mountain. It is so enormous. And I was like, oh wow, there it is. That is calling my name.
That's insane. And
So
for
it was
those
really
listening,
sad.
it's the tallest freestanding mountain in the world. So
Yeah, it's
and by
huge.
freestanding we mean it's not part of a mountain range, right?
No,
So
there's
and
the
it's
flat plains of the Serengeti with the zebras and the lions, and then
that's
boom,
insane.
this 19,000 foot shield volcano just
Yeah.
pops up out of nowhere.
Oh my gosh. So that's insane. What's the elevation of where you were? Were you at sea level to start?
We were not far from it. I would say maybe 2 to 3,000 feet
Okay.
um, was where the city of Arusha was. Don't quote me on that.
Okay.
Um, but we started at 6,000 feet after a brief. We did an acclimatization hike one day, and then
Okay.
the next day we started at 6,000 feet, which is the altitude that I live at
Hmm.
in Wyoming. And yeah,
Nice.
over the next
Wow.
five five days, we ascended 13,000 feet to the top of Kilimanjaro, and it was beautiful and difficult and awe-inspiring and all the emotions.
Mm. What were the so you had a I would imagine a team, right? So you had your guides, your organization that basically would guide you, would set food up, would set up tents and things along that line, like professional guiding organization. And then you had how many other members of your team that had that were climbing with you?
So we went with there were 11 people in our group, 11 climbers. I was the youngest, super proud of that. And they ranged in age and lifestyle background up to, I believe, the older gentlemen were close to 60. Um,
Wow.
and yeah, we had four wonderful guides. Our lead guide had climbed Kilimanjaro, I think he said about 150 times
Mm,
in 5 or 6 years, not very long. And then we had a wonderful staff of porters and cooks
hmm
and um, guides and all sorts of support staff. And we could not have done it without the hardworking Tanzanian staff who
mm,
supported us every step of the way.
hmm it reminds me of just, when mom and I were doing the Inca Trail in Peru. You had basically your team, your guides, and you had people that knew and loved the mountain. Um I've climbed Mount Rainier here in Washington State, and our guide, similar thing. When we climbed it with him, it was like I think like 3 years ago at this point. It was his
Mhm.
250th time climbing
Whoa.
Mount Rainier. Yeah, pretty insane.
That's
Um,
their office. That's someone's
is
office job is climbing
isn't
these
that
huge.
great? Yeah, it 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 quite literally is the office. He's done K2, I think, um, 4 times, 5 times at this point. But anyways, just to say, climbing's awesome, and mad respect for everybody guiding and helping people accomplish some massive dreams and goals. So okay, so how'd you feel? Were you a little nervous when you first got going? So you started around, what'd you say, 3,000 feet or so, 2,600 feet, 3,000 feet, and then
Yeah, that's the altitude of the city. We drove around kind of the back of Kilimanjaro and almost into Kenya actually, and we started. I think it was between 5 and 6,000 feet
okay,
in forest. There were monkeys hanging out in pine trees, and there were little kind of like subsistence coffee farms along the trail because people live at the base of the
Oh
mountain.
my God. Yeah.
And then every day for the next 5 days, we would ascend between 2 and 4,000 feet over the course of a couple hours. And then after a little bit of a rest break, when we got to our camp for the day, we would climb up about another probably 5 to 800 feet for acclimatization. So we spent probably 6 to 8 hours every day walking uphill in increasingly thin oxygen. Just like you mentioned, we passed through, I think it's 4 or 5 different um, ecosystems, life zones. We started in a rainforest, and then kind of like a brushy scrubland, and then what actually looked a lot like the high sage desert of Wyoming, where there were just tiny bushes,
Mm.
and then finally um, just a rocky kind of moonscape, and then at the very top is a glacier, is this huge volcanic caldera full of snow with big established glaciers. And seeing all of that over the course of 5 days was really, really cool. We got to essentially go through a different ecosystem every day and see how living organisms have adapted to increasingly harsh, really, really harsh landscapes.
That is crazy. Like for those listening, it's been described just as Chris just described that you are essentially experiencing all four seasons, within a year, but within this 5-day period, which is that's insane. So I have a curiosity question here. I'm sure you're like me. You watched so many YouTube videos on this thing. Did it like was it like the videos, and did everything like come to life how you were thinking about it in your head? Or what was like the experience going from YouTube, everything you've researched, pictures, videos, to then actually being in the moment of doing this thing?
Oh, that's such a great question, Colin. Yes, my pre-trip research, I did watch a lot of YouTube videos because I like to see things as they unfold. So
Yeah.
I pictured kind of the maybe the remoteness, um, but I did not realize. I think the two biggest things I was impressed by were the strength of sun, the solar energy, the solar radiation was so much stronger. I remember I got a terrible sunburn on like the back of my hands because I forgot to put sunscreen on them. So I was not expecting that based on the YouTube
That
videos.
is the
And
last thing I would
I
ever
did,
expect.
they were red. They were like peeling off the guides, like, "Oh, you gotta get something on
Oh
that."
my God. The last thing you're prepared for.
I know. I like have all these
Friggin'
all this climate equipment and all
sunburn.
this insulatory stuff, but I was also blown away by the vastness of it. I watched like a YouTube compilation of someone's day by day trip, and
Mhm.
I remember the last day, the day that we actually ascended the mountain itself. We had to hike, I think, 7 miles across kind of like a tableland where we got to the top of the volcanic shield, but had to get close to the highest part of the mountain itself. And you could see the base camp the entire time as we're walking 6, 7 miles across this moonscape. Um, and it was humbling to see how massive of a mountain Kilimanjaro was. And no YouTube video, picture, story will ever do justice to that. And it was really awe inspiring because I was reminded that I am so small in the
Mhm.
scheme of the grander world. Um,
How did that make you feel when you look down and realize how small you are?
oh man, the first couple times, this is about probably the third time in my life I've really felt small by something. I think the first time was when I went to the Grand Canyon, and
Right.
maybe even
Oh,
backpacking in Peru. This time it felt good as I
mm,
get older and have more life experience. Um, it felt good to see myself as fleeting and impermanent, and to know that no matter what happens in the rest of my life, if I live to be 120 or don't see 35, that I was part of this, and that part of my legacy and the human story, even though it's a very small part, is the fact that I've been here and I was a little ant on top of this gigantic mountain. And even though I didn't change the mountain definitely changed me.
mm. Gosh, that's so good. Um, yeah, and thank you for sharing that. And I asked that because I read a quote the other day about somebody who felt so small in a situation and it was so powerful for them. You know, typically we'll have these like negative connotations with how small we feel, how insignificant, but you know, they felt powerful and you felt like um grateful is kind of the word that comes to my mind that you can be a part of
Absolutely.
this thing, which is I really appreciate how you see the world, Chris. And okay, so let's get into some of the gnarly stuff. So, like, did you want to quit? Or did you question why you were doing this thing ever? Did you mention feeling sick? Like, I can think about how many times I've wanted to just friggin' quit what I was doing, you know, and wrap things wrap things up and go home. Like, what happened? How'd you keep
Absolutely.
going?
So the first couple days were pretty mellow and easy. The first night we camped at 8,000 feet. That was fine. I didn't notice any impacts. And then the second night we were at around 11,000 feet. I didn't really feel anything there. And then the third night, the third day was absolutely brutal. We had to climb like 4,000 feet, and we were camped at about 14,000, I think 700 feet, which is higher than I'd ever been in my entire life in terms of altitude. I'd climbed a
Mhm.
couple of 14ers in Colorado,
Okay.
but nothing like that. And I was taking altitude sickness medication, which causes your hands and feet to tingle for unknown reasons. Um, it's a blood thinner. And I started to lose my appetite. And this was Christmas Eve. I started to really lose my appetite. I had to force myself
Oh, that's
to,
not good.
no, I had to force myself to like eat a sandwich. Um, and I just, that's that night at almost 15,000 feet is when I really, really started to feel it. I got this nagging stomach ache. I just felt lethargic, like I couldn't breathe.
Mhm.
Kind of like the worst hangover that I'd ever experienced,
Mm.
multiplied by four. And I started to also feel a little bit confused mentally. And I was up that night, vomiting, and my sleep quality was dreadful. And then the first couple days were this really gradual mellow buildup, but then by the last 2 days, we had to, as I mentioned, wake up in the morning on Christmas Day, hike 7 miles across the tableland up to around 16,000 feet, and we got to camp around, I want to say, 11 a.m. And we got to sleep for about 6 or 7 hours, and then we had dinner, and we actually had to start hiking up to the summit
Mhm.
at around 11 o'clock at night. So it's pitch black. The wind is blowing. It is really, really cold and only getting colder. And we're obviously exposed to the elements, walking what seems like back and forth in the dark. And I remember um, we took a full dose. We took twice as much altitude sickness medication as we normally did. So my hands and feet felt like they were vibrating and they were on fire. I didn't want to eat or drink anything, even though I needed to. And I just remember walking up in the dark, and I sort of went into a trance. I remember we stopped every hour or so, and when we weren't stopped, I was just putting one foot in front of the other, trying to just go uphill. And my brain, I don't know if it was the subconscious part or not, I'm not a psychologist, was starting to come up with reasons to quit. And the inner monologue in my head was telling me all sorts of, you can lie about it, you don't have to do this, you don't have to prove anything to anybody, people will still think you're cool, you've come further than anybody you know ever has. um, and so for about 2 hours I had to just marinate in that, and I sort of felt like I couldn't control it. And it was unpleasant for sure. And then we got to the crater, the top of the crater, not the highest point, but pretty close to it. And the sun started to rise, and we could see into the actual caldera that once was this active volcano, and the sun was rising above the clouds, and the glaciers were shimmering, and um, clouds were like rolling across the landscape. And on a clear day, you can see into 3 or 4 countries from the top of Kilimanjaro. And I said to myself, you know, I don't care what I have to to do this. I really have to, and I can dig deep. And once you get to the top of the rim, it's another mile round trip and about another 800 feet of elevation to the actual highest point on the mountain. And I had great guides. We all stopped and did a little, took a little break, put some spikes on our shoes, and he gave us all a juice box. So I drank this, I drank this apple flavored juice box from Tanzania. Um, and by then our group had broken into two two subgroups. I was in the fast group, and then some other people were probably an hour behind us still.
Mm.
And you can almost see the highest point. You can almost see the sign. Um, and something in me said, you know, I did not come all the way to Tanzania to give up now, and I'm going to do it for my wonderful girlfriend Jess, our adorable cat, my students, my parents, everyone who's ever believed in me. I can't let them down now, and I'm not going to say it was easy. It was probably the worst mile I've ever walked in my life through the snow and the wind. And it was by now it's even though the sun is rising, it's like 10 degrees. The air is there's half as much oxygen at this point as there is at sea level.
Mhm.
Uh, and slowly and steadily, one step at a time, stopping whenever I needed to and leaning on my trekking poles and resting my head on a rock. Um, I did make it. And it didn't really hit me at first when I got up to the sign and got the obligatory selfies. And I brought my school flag and held it up. And I got a picture with our guide and my summit porter who helped carry some of our equipment. Um, and then it really hit me that this abstract thing that I've been thinking about doing for a year and a half concretely, but 5 or 6 years in a more abstract way, that I'd actually done it. And it seemed almost impossible to believe. And I did for the first time in my life cry because of just the natural beauty combined with the intense upwelling of emotion um, that I felt. And I got on my satellite phone and messaged my parents and Jess, my girlfriend, to let them know that I was okay. And then I just sat there and took it in and thought about the fact that every triumph I've ever had in my life and every spectacular heartbreak and desperation and feeling of hopelessness, as much as all the triumph, led me to that. And that I had done this thing that people only dream about, um, and been to this incredible place and seen so many things that I'll carry with me forever.
It's like everything that you've gone through, this was almost like the pinnacle of overcoming it all, right? For I know it's been a heck of a decade since you and I
Yes.
first met. And, we all go through a lot of things in life. Um, I want to first say congratulations, Chris. That is
Thank you. Thank you.
what an what an extraordinary feeling, and one that can only I think can only be replicated by doing extremely hard things like that push you to be a different person than you're used to and accustomed to than going through your daily life, right? First off, I just want to acknowledge I know that feeling about when you think you're at the top, but you still have an entire freaking crater to walk over in order to actually get to the summit. Um,
Yes.
so props to you, man. What an accomplishment. And a lot of adversity tolerance, I would imagine that you were going through. I want to bring this back to the audience for a second here. For those that are thinking about doing something like this, or have thought about doing, a monumental bucket list or adventure or challenge or something to stretch their comfort zones, or, it's like we all have that sense of adventure in us, right? Or at least I think I know that I do. I know that a lot of people that we connect with do, but we don't
Oh,
actually
absolutely.
tap into it enough or at all. What would you say to somebody who is considering their own Mount Kilimanjaro expedition, who is hesitant to actually pull the trigger on doing something like this?
That is a great, another great question, Colin. And that's my whole purpose for talking about it so much at school and coming on this podcast is to say to people, no matter what your Kilimanjaro is, and with adventures like this, there's no one size fits all, whether it's actually climbing Kilimanjaro or just going somewhere that you've dreamed of your entire life, rafting the Grand Canyon, visiting national parks, anything that speaks to you in that way. I encourage people to do it because we all have one short life, and nothing is guaranteed in the future. And the reward, the feeling of satisfaction of knowing that you pushed yourself outside of your comfort zone, and everyone's comfort zone is different, is so deeply satisfying that I think it's really worth it, to take smart risks. And I always include the caveat of smart.
Mhm.
I'm in no way recommending the couch to Mount Everest exercise plan, but if you invest the time and do the research and invest in the prep work, it's really deeply satisfying and very much worth it, because I found that fear is kind of like a bubble. There's this membrane on the outside, but once you poke that, it kind of just collapses, and you see that these things that once seemed impossible and daunting and only for the special among us, if you will, that you can do them too. So that's my message to everyone: is take smart risks, prepare, and the thing that you think will give your life that sense of meaning and take your experience to the next level.
That's some powerful stuff. I mean, we're talking about fear now, right? And I've never heard fear described like that. And I think that it's so true because oftentimes what we fear doesn't really exist, right? It's stories that we'll oftentimes make up in our head. Fear often, it can definitely be very real though. I will acknowledge that. Like there are things that I know
Absolutely.
are going to frighten me and us, and those are scary things. And to take action in the face of fear is something to where you are walking off of that mountain, right? A stronger Chris, a stronger individual, somebody who is stronger for your kids and your students that you teach, for Jess, your girlfriend, for whoever you're impacting, right? The individuals listening to this. Um, Sometimes, however, fear is not actually real, or as much as we make it out to be, until we take the action in it and pop the bubble, and then it's like, okay, I did that, right? And
Yes.
overcame that. So yeah, fear is a very powerful topic, and I enjoy talking about it because it's something that I experience often, um, as well, just as many people in here who are apprehensive to do something because of anticipation is another side of fear, right? Again, the fear of the unknown.
Yes.
What would you say financially to somebody who is like, well, that's awesome, Chris. Like I'd do it in a heartbeat, but I don't have the money or the resources to go do that.
That is definitely the toughest part.
Mhm.
And the economic dimension of visiting Tanzania is the part of the whole trip that I still wrestle with, because it is
Right.
a beautiful, very raw, very authentic, but developing country. And I'm very blessed. I'm very privileged. Had I not, grown up the way I did, with the parents that I had in the family background, and living in Wyoming, and had the professional career opportunities and the opportunity to go to college and finish,
Mhm.
and always be loved and supported. Um, I would say that, if you're really committed, it doesn't necessarily have to be something that you do next year, but maybe
Mhm.
start saving
Mhm.
whatever you can, find ways, and then make sacrifices, perhaps work overtime. I took on extra professional responsibilities that required me to work 7 days a week, in order to do
Wow.
that. But I wish I had a more one size fits all response. And in my personal case, there just seemed to be this point where, the universe, or God, or whatever divine being you believe in, there was definitely a little bit of luck involved, in the sense that I had this big dream, and when I booked the trip, I only paid for perhaps 5 to 10% of the cost,
Mm.
and I really wasn't sure. where I was going to get the money, but through my job, I was able to have these doors open for professional opportunities. And I did make a lot of sacrifices leading up to it. I didn't leave the town where we live in for months. I didn't eat out at restaurants. I ate lentils for lunch every week. I filled up my car with gas maybe once a month. Um, and I always remind myself that, yeah, it's uncomfortable and it's painful right now, but it will be worth it in a few months. So there's no one size fits all answer there.
Well, I think your one size fits all answer is your story about what you exactly did. And I'm so inspired just sitting here listening to you because what I'm thinking about is how you began with the end in mind, right? It goes back to the very beginning of our conversation where you said that you pulled the trigger and you committed to doing it and the how was still to be figured out. But the what and the why was a commitment on your end. And I just am so inspired by that because then you basically sacrifice certain things that you were willing to sacrifice and you developed a plan of your own. You put intentions out there about what you were doing within the world and then doors and opportunities opened up with the extra things at work to get some extra money, the working the extra days, whatever these opportunities were. Um, you know, you committed to doing this thing and I'm like, I think that is so cool. And I think that anybody listening to this can take away like, beginning with the end in mind and fully committing and going all in on something to the point where it's like you're all in, right? And then you continue to figure things out because when we go all in on something, it's we see things differently. We see the opportunities to cut
Absolutely.
back on the spending, right? Like, okay, I'm fully committed, and so now it's like you're looking at the world differently on how you can really make it work. And I think that goes in line with, most things in life, at least from, your experience, my experience, like when we are fully committed, bought in, all in, like then it's like
Absolutely.
you start moving things around and you see things differently. So I appreciate you saying that. And for those listening, like I'm totally just throwing these at Chris. These were not scripted. There's nothing scripted about this conversation. I am just genuinely curious and asking Chris questions that I think the audience and y'all will find valuable and hopefully derive some value from. So Chris, I appreciate you being flexible. It's just my very random questions that I'm throwing at you. So, um, well, I don't. Maybe I'll do one more for you. Outline some
Sure.
lessons for me. Maybe if you had like two or three key takeaways, whether that be from like preparation or overcoming adversity or just being so glad that you did it and living with no regret or I don't know if you have reflected on that much. I'm knowing you, I'm sure that you have, but what are two or three takeaways or key lessons for our audience listening here today?
Oh yes, Colin. I have been reflecting on this experience
Yeah,
since I
no doubt.
finished doing it and when I was still in Tanzania, and pretty much ever since.
Mhm.
I learned I learned so many things. I think the one thing, the biggest one that I take away from this experience, and that I knew from Peru and all the other experiences, um, but that as human beings, whether you live in Tanzania or Tonga or Cincinnati, that most human beings have a lot of we have so much more in common, and just being a human connects us to every other human being in so many more ways than I think we realize. Especially if you watch the news and things like that. I didn't speak the language, as we mentioned, when I went to Tanzania, but I still was able to make authentic connections with people just by smiling and saying hello and seeing that we all feel the same emotions. We all experience great triumph and significant heartbreak, and we all just want a better future for ourselves and our friends and the people we loved, no matter where we are. And so, no matter where you're born or what color your skin is or how you grew up, there's something that connects all of us. Some other things that I
Wow.
learned that I think I really remember um, are the power of delayed gratification. I've obviously set out to climb mountains, especially in Colorado and Wyoming, close to where I live. But I've never spent 5 days working on a project essentially with no guarantee of success, um, just to say I've done it, and then having spent all that time, and it was a lot of time with myself on the mountain. There's no TV, there's no cell service. I didn't bring any books because I didn't want myself or someone else to have to carry them. So I just spent a lot of time with me, with the person I am. And so I had a lot of opportunities to think about things and consider why I was doing it. And so, long story short, delayed gratification is awesome. There was so much satisfaction and meaning that I was able to get from just the process of walking and looking off into the horizon and seeing another country and thinking about, how has evolution shaped this landscape? All of this leading up to this accomplishment that now I carry with me forever. So I encourage people to think long term, whatever that long term is, whether it's a 6 day mountain climb or spending the next 15 years building your business. Because once you achieve that dream, it's something like you said that you carry with you forever. If I lost everything, I would still have the pride of knowing that I pushed myself to the top of Kilimanjaro, and that no one can ever take that away from me. And then the third one is kind of touched on this, but you can push yourself further than you think is possible. And we all have different limits, and you can change your limits through exercise and meditation and reading and education and all those things. But even if you consciously choose to expand your limits by training to climb Kilimanjaro or any other mountain, you're going to still have that limit, even though you move the goalpost much further, and you're going to arrive at that limit. And then when it seems like you can't, you're going to find something within yourself that says, I can go past this, and I can walk until I really do think I'm going to throw up and lay on the ground and never walk again. But then you're able to stand up and keep walking. And so I learned that there's so much more to me as a person than I realized going into this. And I'm still finding out things about myself, and I do a lot of writing about what I experienced, both on Kilimanjaro and then in the wildlife and cultural safari that we did afterwards.
Mm.
But those are probably the three biggest things that stick out right off the top of my head.
I appreciate you taking the time to reflect on those things, and I can tell that you really took time because you are able to so clearly articulate those 3 points, and I think that's when you really know how much thought and reflection you've given to it. So I heard a couple different things. Number one, the power of human connection and how we're all connected in one way, shape, or form, no matter if we speak the language, no matter if we don't, no matter where we're at in the world, no matter what we're doing, who we're with. I so full heartedly believe in that, and I'm it excites me that that was the first thing that you said, and that came to mind. The second thing you mentioned, delayed gratification, um, and I also heard in there just the power of sitting with yourself for an extended period of time, and what you were able to learn about yourself and gain more clarity on who you are as an individual. Because I think it ties right into the last thing and the third bullet point that you touched on, which is we're capable of so much more than we give ourselves credit for. And so I'm super grateful that you came on and shared your experience here, Chris. I could ask you a ton more questions. Specifically, I'll probably have to carry this one offline, but I'm interested in how you balance the time and focus management of everything with working a full-time job, with relationships, with life, and how you went about planning and everything. We'll put a pin in that for now because I want to we're gonna run into another 40-minute thing here. So I want to ask you the four final questions, and before we do that, I just want to say thank you for coming on and sharing your story. And the goal of the podcast is to positively impact as many people as possible to live the life that they are destined to live. And so I hope it inspires at least one person. I know that person's already been me. Just being able to reconnect with you and and B, hear your story. Um, Gosh, man. So props to you. And it's those things like what you said, like these are experiences that can never be taken away from you. Right. So thank you for coming on this show. And for the final four questions that we run through everybody. First one is, what is your favorite book? It's typically, what is your favorite book, podcast, YouTube, or like learning material? But I just know you were such a book guy that I only told you what's your favorite book. But if you had a YouTube or podcast channel, feel free to throw it in there. But what's your favorite freaking book here, Chris?
Thank you, Colin. So, having worked on college, I don't have the mental energy to read for fun. Right here, I have the teacher's handbook for contextualized language instruction, and then have a book on curriculum leadership and cultures of curriculum and the art of teaching Spanish.
Oh yeah.
None of those are my favorite book. That's what I've spent a
It's
lot of time
riveting.
reading. Oh, it's thrilling stuff with the APA citations. My favorite book is still, even though I haven't read it in a long time, is The Alchemist by
Oh,
Hello.
come on.
I love that book.
Come on. How many times you read it?
Oh, at least three or four. I
Yeah.
brought it to Argentina a couple years ago. I read it in Spanish. I've like given copies to people. It's very simplistic, and one of my college professors said it's something that you could read on the beach with a glass of wine. But I like the message. It's not a perfect book, but if I had to pick one off the top of my head, it
Mhm.
is it is The Alchemist. I like
Yep.
that the shepherd boy goes on a quest to follow his heart and live his dreams and connect with himself.
Yeah. Sounds pretty symbolic of climbing Mount Kilimanjaro there and moving from Delaware to Wyoming and doing all the experiences that that life presents to you that you then take advantage of and tackle head on. So cool. I love it. I don't know if you saw it, but I was holding up. I knew it was on the bookshelf around here. I had that thing marked up pretty good. So second question here, Chris, is what is your favorite quote?
Oh man, I love quotes.
Yeah, I
I
know.
I have two whiteboards in my classroom, and I write on the one like during class to model verb conjugations and things like that.
Hmm.
But then the other quote is or the other whiteboard is where I put learning targets. And at the top, I put a quote every week or two for the students. Um, and I love reading news articles. So when I recently discovered that Charlie Munger, the co-chair, whatever his title was of Berkshire Hathaway,
For sure.
one of his quotes was that the best armor against old age is a life well spent leading up to it, or something to that effect. I don't
Mm.
have the exact quote in
What
front
does
of
that
me,
mean to
and
you?
that really it resonates to me is that I accept my own mortality. I don't dance around the fact that one day my life will not end, but I know that right now I have control over what I do with it. And so right now, as a 29-year-old high school teacher, I'm working every day to build a life that one day I can look back on and be immensely proud of
Hmm.
when I'm older. And so I don't have to fear aging and the transition away from being a professional and eventually passing away, because I know that I will have seen and done everything that I dreamed of
Mm.
when
And
that time comes.
thank you for sharing that. And I think it's important. And I hope you don't mind me mentioning this, but I think the audience will find this super relevant or at least inspiring in one way or another. But like your journey to getting where you were was not super linear, right? Like it took
Oh,
extensive amount of schooling and figuring out what you don't want to do in order to figure out what you might want to do in order to actually figure out what you want to do, at least for the time being, which is move to somewhere beautiful like Wyoming and teach high school students the importance of education, and B, how to speak Spanish. And then every other life lesson you can unravel within your teaching and your philosophical approach to the classroom, and then actually be able to go take them out into the world and go develop cross-cultural intelligence and see other parts of the world and have these experiences. And so it's like I think that's a super important I really value how your perspective in that, and thank you for sharing that with myself and anybody listening to this.
Oh, I'm happy to do it, Colin. Thank
Yeah.
you for helping me to dig deep and prompting me to think about things that I would not have otherwise,
Mm.
as I continue to digest this wonderful experience. And I hope the people listening get something out of this as well.
Yeah. I have no doubt that they are. And I am like so enthralled in this. So third question is what's next up on the bucket list? So I don't want to like, step too soon out of the waters of, it was like 3 months ago you're at top of Kilimanjaro, but I know you got Yucatan happening here in a couple weeks. Little getaway with the lady, and you got Costa Rica again coming up. Or no, Peru. Um, what's on your bucket list, either for like you solo travel or maybe something with Jess? What else do you have on the bucket list, Chris?
Oh heavens! Two things come to mind. The first one is that I think it's been already 2 years ago. Our school in Wyoming, somehow through the state office of education, we got connected with a school in Taiwan, a kind of tech school in the southwestern part of the island.
Mm.
And so I applied for a grant to. We've done Google Meets and we like use Google Classroom and the kids email back and forth and talk about their lives.
Wow.
But I want to go and meet the teachers and principals and students in person. So I've applied for a grant to do
Whoa.
that this summer. So that's one bucket list item in sort of like my professional realm, if you will, because I was recently accepted into a doctoral program, so I'm trying to incorporate cultural education into that. So I'd like to weave the trip to Taiwan into my doctoral project and also just enrich my teaching. But in my personal life, my next bucket list item is actually doing something that Jess, my girlfriend, has always dreamed about doing, which is going to Italy and Greece, probably in a
Oh,
couple of years.
let's go.
Those are places that she's always wanted to see. I've only been to Europe for like 3 days,
Mm.
so I would be really like to see that. And having done this trip by myself, I would say all of my bucket list trips in the future either involve going with her
Yep.
or someone else that I love, whether it be a relative or a sibling or something like that, because it's so much more fun to share these experiences
Yeah.
with someone else. So I have two bucket list items.
I love it. Super cool stuff about Taiwan. Amazing. Italy was we actually did not go to like I would say like Shelby and I went to the Dolomites this past summer, and that was like our
Uh,
Italy experience, was like being out in the mountains, so like something that you'd be just all about. But
oh, that's
never I
awesome.
never actually made it to like like traditional Italy, Rome, Florence, anything along those lines. So super cool, man. Last question here is, what would 65-year-old Chris tell your current day self?
That is my favorite question of all the ones that you posed to me, Colin. And the one that I thought the most about,
Mm.
actually, I actually even did the math. In 36 years, I will be 65. It's hard to think about. I hadn't
Wow.
conceptualized myself being old until the last couple years. And
Wow.
I don't want to be 65, but I also accept with each day that I go to school and live my life and drink my yerba mate that it's getting closer. And I build my life right now in a way that I'm not resisting that. But long
Mm.
story short, I hope that future me would say that I used that as far as I know, the one life that I get, that I used it well, that I have nothing to regret, that I left nothing on the field, and that I helped other people along
Mm.
the way, whether directly or indirectly, by inspiring and empowering them. So I just hope he would say, hell of a job, well
Mm.
done.
Mm. It's pretty in line with the quote that resonates with you, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, I'm right in line with that, man. Um, it's it's super cliche, and I've always heard that the things that we hear are cliche are the things that we should probably lean into even more because they're very
Absolutely.
real. And so when we hear that we only do have, you know, one life to live on this earth at the very least, right? And that is what I believe to be a very true statement. And so to make the most of it, living, serving, loving in like the greatest capacities that we can, I think is ultimately what you and I are both in agreement on a life that would be very well lived and what our 65-year-old selves would be very proud of at that moment in time. Not if, but when we do get there. So Chris, we'll go ahead
Hell
and
yeah.
wrap things right there. It's really been amazing to have you on, and thank you for sharing your story, your inspirations, your anecdotes, your life philosophies, your life with us, with me, with the viewers, the listeners. Thank you very much for coming out on the show and carving about 3 hours of your time out of this wonderful Tuesday evening now that we've had 6 Zoom calls back to back. I really appreciate it.
I am I am so happy to do it. Colin, I'm happy for you inviting me on here. I think it's really cool that you're doing this. And more than anyone, you were the first person that I encountered in this new chapter of my life that began a decade ago, as we talked about. And you've helped me so much, and I'm so glad we've kept in touch. And you're a wonderful person, and you also inspire me as well, even though I don't have a cool podcast right now.
Yeah, first and foremost, it goes both ways. I always have loved listening to whatever you had to say. Like I'm just you think on such a higher plane than a lot of folks, and I appreciate that about you. I appreciate your intellect and just how you think and your unique perspectives. And there was a reason I believe that you and I were roommates a decade ago, man. And
Absolutely. Of all people,
only getting started with our journeys and adventures and tapping into our sense of exploration. And I hope that other individuals can find that same thing in their own regard, whatever that may be. And so you may not have a podcast yet, but you got a classroom of students who are just awesome. And I can guarantee you, impacted in a positive way by you, man. And you're living a dream of something I've always said I'll do when I retire. So who knows? Maybe it's sooner rather than later after talking to you, man. So I appreciate you, Chris, and thanks for coming on.